Hello again. This time, going to be doing a bit of kit bashing. So I bought a Miscast pack from Mierce Minis years ago, and I didn't have enough pieces to assemble whatever this was meant to be, so I'm just combining the bits into something new. Some big mutant desert horror. It's looking a bit like a crab, so I fiddled around until I could make some kind of rough crab shape. But I only had 2 legs, so I decided to make it a kind of techno crab borg, so that I could put some kind of wires and prosthetic legs in, and to have that kind of post-apocalyptic mutant aesthetic. So with a mix of super glue, hot glue, and a few adhesives, I just started slapping bits together, and then trimming them down where they didn't quite fit. You do have to be a little bit careful when filing down resin, so I kind of prefer clipping or using a knife on it, but you can file it down if you wet the area first, so the resin dust gets trapped in the water instead of going up into the air. I had one arm, which I assume is meant to be from the same kit, but I'm not 100% on that. And I was missing a large bit of the pincer, which there's probably a scientific name for, but I don't know it. So I started gluing little plasticard triangles in, which I made from the bases I was never going to use. I also went rogue and decided to use a foam core base, which wasn't circular, which will be very offensive to a lot of people. Then using hot glue to get a quick bond, I attached these large kind of things to the side of the head. Not really sure what these are meant to be, but now they're antennas. Or horns. Then to balance the weight, just putting a bit more foam core on the back of the base, and making another contact point under his rear. For the missing legs, I took some malleable sculpting wire, trimmed it down to length, and then glued it into the socket so it would be trailing behind the crab. This gives me the option of sculpting it into a proper leg later, or leaving it as trailing wires for that cyborg element. I then did a similar process for the head by taking the same sculpting wire and making some loops coming out of his head. Then trimming down some bamboo skewers for a kind of eye stalk, as well as some rods where the arm was missing on the other side. Where the back was exposed, I took some foam strips and glued them down just to provide some bulking, which I could then later sculpt over. Before pinching off the edges to make it a bit more organic. To cover up some of the gaps and fill in the detail, I took some Milliput, mixed it together, and then applied it into the gaps and crevices, as well as sculpting a bit of detail on the arms and legs. This was to bring some more organic detail back in, so pushing some lines in with the edge of a tool, making it look a bit like muscle tissue, kind of strained scar tissue as well. I also whacked a fair amount in the gaps, so it would seal up the worst of them. Moving my attention back to the base, took some styrofoam offcuts, pushed a rock texture into them using a tinfoil ball, and glued them down onto the base. With those cured, I mixed up a batch of sculptor mold and applied it onto the base, as well as the back of the model, where I was going to build up a kind of natural rocky mound as well. I figured having a back covered in rusty metal and dirt would be a good disguise in the apocalypse. With the back now dry, I took some random stuff that was lying on my desk and glued it onto the back of scrap. So bits of bamboo skewer, plasticard, corrugated cardboard, and a few little plastic rods as well. This needed to be blended together, so I mixed up some texture paste, which I applied over the base and the back of the model, as well as a few places I wanted there to be some big build-ups of rust. Once the texture paste was dry, I used my fairly typical brown colour scheme, using a base coat of burnt umber, followed by a tan colour, with some grey to detail the rocks, and a final dry brush of white over the entire thing. But while doing the base, I decided this would be a pretty good base coat for the model as well, and it would give me a layer to work off of. So I applied the tan colour over the mini as well, and then focused the white dry brush only on the top half of the model to give a kind of fake lighting effect. This next step probably isn't necessary, but I decided to move house. So I'm now on a different desk, where I have a lot more space, and you don't have to stare at every paint I have in the background. Using a silver paint, I then went in and hit the metallic elements, but made sure to leave the brown in the creases and the crevices so you get that build-up of rust as well. For the mouth and the muscle tissue, I took thinned down magenta paint and slapped it all over the metallic piping, and let it kind of bleed into the edges as well. This also helps to break up the brown colouring, and make it pop a bit more. To double up on that, I took some bright yellow paint, and applied that all over the metallic elements, so I could bump the rust up, make it more vibrant, and make the whole thing a bit more interesting to look at. As I am aware, I use a lot of brown, so I'm really trying to bump up the colouring for the rust, and add some more kind of corrosive colouring as well. On the base, I went for a final detail pass with some white paint, just to pull out the top of the details, and blend some of the elements together again. Taking some watered down blue paint, I then applied it on top of the pink, so there'd be a bit of discoloration, and it'd be a bit more mottled. Adding some foliage onto the base, took some dark brown tufts, as well as some beige ones, and put 2 or 3 sparingly on the base. This is also a good opportunity to cover up any mistakes on the base, such as anywhere the paint is too thick, or maybe you lost a bit of detail. But being quite sparing with the tufts, as I didn't want too much plant life in what's meant to be an irradiated wasteland. Those were then the finishing touches. So we have this giant kind of mutant crab cyborg monster that hides in the scrap, and as you can see, it's quite big compared to a regular boy. So yeah, great way to use up some leftover pieces, do a bit of sculpting. Thanks for watching. I should be releasing videos on a semi-regular schedule now, probably once every 2 to 3 weeks, and I'm going to be putting a bit more time and effort into each of the videos as well, seeing as I have the space and time now. But catch you next time.